Niccolò Machiavelli, the most dangerous illusion of our time is our obsession with harmony, a deceptive state that lulls us into stagnation while conflict, the very force we've been taught to avoid, may be our greatest catalyst for growth and transformation. Imagine standing at the edge of a serene lake. The water is perfectly still, reflecting the world above like a flawless mirror. Beautiful, yes. But in this stillness, nothing moves, nothing changes, nothing grows. This lake is dead compared to the rushing river that carves new paths through mountains, carries nutrients, and sustains countless ecosystems in its turbulent journey. Which would you rather be, the stagnant lake or the dynamic river? The comfort trap. You wake up each morning and follow the same routine. You take the same route to work, exchange pleasantries with the same colleagues, attend the same meetings, and discuss the same problems with the same solutions. Your relationships have settled into comfortable patterns where everyone knows their role. There are no arguments, no challenges, no uncomfortable conversations. Everything is peaceful, and yet, beneath this tranquil surface, something withers. Your creativity diminishes, your passion fades, your mind, designed for solving complex problems and adapting to new challenges, begins to atrophy. The harmony you've constructed has become your prison. This is not merely a poetic metaphor, it's a neurological reality. The human brain evolved in response to challenges, not comfort. When we face conflicts, our neural pathways reorganize, our problem-solving abilities sharpen, and our mental resilience strengthens. The ancient Greeks understood this paradox intuitively. Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, declared, Punchwars, Itras wade Punchwars. Daniel war is the father of all things. For Heraclitus, opposition and conflict were not unfortunate accidents in an otherwise harmonious universe, but the very principle of existence. The philosophical truth behind constructive tension. For centuries, philosophers have recognized that progress emerges from tension, not from peaceful accord. Hegel's dialectical method, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, describes how new ideas emerge from the conflict between opposing positions. Without the antithesis to challenge the thesis, we remain trapped in the limitations of our initial understanding. Friedrich Nietzsche took this concept further with his notion of the will to power, arguing that the drive to overcome resistance is fundamental to life itself. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger isn't just a motivational poster slogan, it's a profound insight into the nature of human development. We grow not despite challenges, but because of them. Consider the ancient Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired using gold, silver, or platinum. The philosophy behind this practice teaches that breakage and repair are part of the history of an object, not something to disguise or hide. The conflict, the breaking, becomes the most beautiful aspect of the piece, highlighted rather than concealed. But we need not rely solely on philosophical insights. Modern science has validated what these thinkers intuited centuries ago. The neuroscience of productive conflict. When we encounter conflict, our brains release a cascade of neurochemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, that heighten our awareness and cognitive function. This stress response, when kept within manageable levels, doesn't damage our brains, but strengthens them. Neuroscientists call this hormesis, the principle that exposure to moderate stress induces beneficial adaptations. Research from Stanford University has shown that neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, increases in response to moderate stress, particularly in the hippocampus, a brain region crucial for learning and memory. This means that conflicts, challenges, and problems quite literally grow our brains. Comfort and harmony, by contrast, create no such stimulus for growth. The phenomenon of desirable difficulties, a term coined by psychologists Robert Bjork and Elizabeth Bjork, describes how introducing challenges during learning leads to stronger long-term retention and deeper understanding. When students struggle with material, experiencing cognitive conflict, they develop more robust neural networks than when information is presented in an easily digestible manner. Even our immune systems operate on this principle. Vaccination works by introducing a controlled conflict, a weakened pathogen, or fragment, that triggers the immune response without causing disease. Through this beneficial conflict, our bodies become stronger and more resilient against future threats. The social psychology of echo chambers. Our modern society increasingly shields us from intellectual conflict. Social media algorithms create echo chambers where we hear only views that align with our own. Educational institutions sometimes prioritize emotional comfort over intellectual challenge. Workplaces implement policies aimed at eliminating all forms of disagreement. While these intentions may be noble, they create dangerous consequences. Studies from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology have demonstrated that groups composed of like-minded individuals tend toward increasingly extreme positions, a phenomenon known as group polarization. Without the tempering influence of opposing viewpoints, our beliefs become more rigid, more extreme, and less connected to reality. Political scientist Cass Sunstein warns that when we eliminate ideological friction from our information environments, we undermine the foundations of democratic society. Democracy itself is built on the principle of constructive conflict, the competition of ideas in the marketplace of public discourse. When we silence disagreement in the name of harmony, we don't strengthen our communities, we weaken them. The catastrophic failures of groupthink provide sobering examples. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the Challenger space shuttle disaster, and numerous corporate collapses have been attributed to decision-making environments where harmony was valued above critical opposition. In each case, the suppression of conflict led not to success, but to disaster. The innovation paradox: look at any transformative innovation in human history, and you'll find conflict at its core. The theory of evolution emerged from Darwin's intellectual struggle with prevailing religious doctrines. Einstein's relativity theories developed through his refusal to accept the harmonious consensus around Newtonian physics. The digital revolution arose from challenging the established ways of processing, storing, and transmitting information. In business, companies that maintain internal harmony often find themselves outcompeted by rivals who embrace productive tension. Former Intel CEO Andy Grove's famous maxim, "Only the paranoid survive," speaks to this truth. Companies that become too comfortable with their success, too harmonious in their internal culture, too resistant to disruption, eventually fail. Google's famous 20% time policy, allowing engineers to spend 1/5 of their working hours on projects of their choosing, institutionalized productive conflict by encouraging employees to challenge existing products and processes. This policy led to the development of Gmail, Google Maps, and numerous other innovations that might never have emerged in a more harmonious corporate structure. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he didn't seek to create harmony, he ruthlessly eliminated projects, challenged assumptions, and created productive tension throughout the organization. This approach didn't make Apple a pleasant workplace by conventional standards, but it transformed a nearly bankrupt company into one of the most valuable enterprises in human history. The personal growth imperative: on a personal level, our most significant periods of growth almost invariably coincide with times of conflict. The death of a loved one forces us to confront our mortality and reevaluate our priorities. The end of a relationship compels us to examine our patterns and make different choices. Career setbacks push us to develop new skills and perspectives. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The process of individuation, becoming a fully realized person, requires confronting the shadow aspects of ourselves, not maintaining an artificial harmony between our conscious and unconscious minds. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. The conflict itself wasn't desirable, but his response to that conflict, finding meaning in the most horrific circumstances, enabled not just survival, but profound psychological and spiritual growth. The false dichotomy. At this point, you might object that I've created a false dichotomy. Surely, there must be a middle path between constant conflict and stagnant harmony, and you would be right, but with an important qualification: the resolution isn't avoiding conflict in favor of some idealized harmony, but recognizing that productive conflict is itself a higher form of harmony. Just as musical harmony doesn't mean all instruments playing the same note, but different notes in creative tension with each other, true social and psychological harmony emerges from the productive integration of opposing forces. The Taoist concept of yin and yang illustrates this principle perfectly. These opposing forces don't eliminate each other to create peace, they dance together in dynamic balance. The boundary between them is not a wall but a moving curve, each containing the seed of the other. This is not static harmony, but dynamic equilibrium, a higher-order peace that emerges from, rather than excludes, conflict. Transformative conflict, the path forward. If conflict is unavoidable and potentially beneficial, how do we harness it for growth rather than destruction? The answer lies in distinguishing between types of conflict. Destructive conflict focuses on persons rather than problems, employs tactics designed to harm rather than resolve, and aims for dominance rather than understanding. Transformative conflict, by contrast, focuses on issues rather than identities, employs methods designed to clarify rather than obscure, and aims for integration rather than victory. Harvard negotiation experts Roger Fisher and William Ury advocate principled negotiation, separating people from problems, focusing on interests rather than positions, generating multiple options before deciding, and insisting on objective criteria. This approach doesn't eliminate conflict, but transforms it from a destructive force into a creative one. Psychologist John Gottman's research on successful marriages reveals that conflict itself doesn't predict relationship failure, it's how couples handle conflict that matters. Couples who practice turning toward rather than turning away during conflicts, who maintain a 5:1 ratio of positive to negative interactions, and who avoid what Gottman calls the four horsemen, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, can harness the power of conflict to deepen their connection rather than damage it. In organizational settings, leadership expert Patrick Lencioni argues that artificial harmony is one of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. High-performing teams don't avoid conflicts, they engage in what Lencioni calls ideological conflict, passionate disagreement about ideas, conducted with personal respect and a commitment to finding the best solution, not just winning the argument. The river of becoming. Imagine your life not as a peaceful lake, but as a river, sometimes flowing gently, sometimes rushing through rapids, sometimes encountering obstacles that require new paths. This river doesn't seek to eliminate rocks in its path, it shapes them, and is shaped by them. The conflict between water and stone creates the river's unique character, its distinctive sound, its particular beauty. The ancient Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, famously said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." This insight captures the essential truth about conflict and change. The river is constantly in conflict with itself, with gravity, with the landscape it traverses, and this very conflict is what makes it a river rather than a stagnant pool. When we embrace this perspective, we stop seeing conflict as something to avoid and start recognizing it as the very current that carries us forward. We develop what psychologists call stress hardiness, the ability to remain engaged with challenges rather than avoiding them, to commit to finding meaning in difficulties rather than just enduring them, and to see changes as opportunities rather than threats. The hope in disruption. There's a profound hope in this perspective. If growth emerges from conflict rather than comfort, then our struggles aren't meaningless torments, but invitations to transformation. The difficulties we face, personally, collectively, globally, contain within them the seeds of our evolution. Consider climate change, perhaps the greatest conflict between human civilization and natural systems. This existential challenge isn't something we can resolve by returning to some imagined harmony with nature. Instead, it demands a transformative conflict that will reshape both our societies and our relationship with the natural world. And from this conflict may emerge not just solutions to environmental problems, but new forms of social organization, new technologies, new ways of understanding ourselves as part of, rather than separate from, natural systems. Or consider the painful reckonings with historical injustices occurring in many societies. These conflicts don't threaten social cohesion, they create the possibility for a deeper, more authentic cohesion, built on truth rather than silence, on justice rather than oppression, disguised as peace. Even the internal conflicts of our own minds, the tensions between our values and or between our desires and our responsibilities, between who we are and who we aspire to be, provide not obstacles to happiness, but the very mechanism through which we become more fully human. The practice of productive conflict. How might we begin cultivating a healthier relationship with conflict in our daily lives? Here are practical approaches, informed by both ancient wisdom and contemporary research. 1. Seek intellectual challenge. Deliberately expose yourself to viewpoints that contradict your own. Read authors you disagree with. Engage respectfully with people whose perspectives differ from yours. The goal isn't to change your mind necessarily, but to strengthen your thinking through exposure to counter-arguments. 2. Practice constructive disagreement. Learn to disagree without disparaging. Focus on ideas rather than persons. Ask questions that clarify rather than ones that entrap. Listen to understand rather than to refute. 3. Embrace beginner's mind. The Zen concept of Shoshin beginner's mind encourages approaching situations without preconceptions, even in areas where you have expertise. This openness creates fertile ground for productive conflict between what you think you know and what you might discover. 4. Cultivate resilience through voluntary hardship. Ancient philosophical traditions, from Stoicism to Buddhism, advocate deliberate exposure to discomfort as a path to freedom. Cold showers, fasting, meditation retreats. These practices build your capacity to engage with conflict rather than avoid it. 5. Normalize failure. Create environments, at home, at work, in educational settings, where failure is recognized, not as a catastrophe, but as valuable feedback. The conflict between expectation and reality becomes a teacher rather than a tormentor. 6. Practice dialectical thinking. Rather than seeing contradictions as problems to eliminate, explore how opposing truths might both be valid in different contexts or at different levels. This approach, central to dialectical behavioral therapy, helps navigate the inevitable conflicts of human experience. 7. Develop conflict competence. Like any skill, handling conflict effectively improves with practice. Start with smaller disagreements to build your capacity for engaging productively with larger ones. The paradoxical peace. The ultimate paradox is this: true peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict, but from transforming our relationship with it. When we no longer fear disagreement, when we no longer need everyone to see the world as we do, when we recognize that opposition and tension are not obstacles to our flourishing, but essential components of it, then we discover a deeper tranquility that no external harmony could provide. This is the wisdom embedded in countless spiritual traditions. The Buddha didn't achieve enlightenment by avoiding the suffering of existence, but by turning toward it with compassionate attention. Jesus didn't promise his followers a life free from conflict, but gave them a new way to respond to it. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't advise Arjuna to avoid the battle, but to approach it with detachment and devotion. Perhaps what we need is not less conflict, but better conflict, conflicts conducted with respect rather than contempt, with curiosity rather than certainty, with commitment to shared truth rather than to personal victory. The way forward. Conflict as communion. The word conflict derives from the Latin confluere, meaning to strike together. Like flint striking steel, this collision creates the spark of new possibilities. But this etymology suggests something else as well. Conflict, at its root, is a form of contact. When we engage in conflict with ideas, with systems, with each other, we create a connection that harmony alone cannot provide. Perhaps this is why some of our deepest bonds are formed not in moments of ease, but in shared struggles. Veterans speak of the profound connection forged in combat. Activists describe the solidarity that emerges from confronting injustice together. Couples reflect on how navigating difficulties strengthened rather than weakened their relationship. In an age of increasing polarization, we need not less conflict, but more skillful engagement with the conflicts that already exist. Rather than retreating to comfortable bubbles of agreement, we can learn to strike together in ways that create light rather than heat, connection rather than division, growth rather than destruction. The river doesn't fight the mountain out of hatred. Their conflict creates the valley where new life flourishes. The seedling doesn't battle the soil out of anger. Their struggle brings forth the flower. The butterfly doesn't struggle against the chrysalis out of rebellion. Their conflict
enables flight. So too with us, our conflicts, with each other, with systems of injustice, with our own limitations, need not be seen as unfortunate disruptions of an idealized harmony. They can instead be recognized as the very forces that shape us, connect us, and move us forward in our individual and collective evolution. Don't trust in peace that requires silence in the face of wrong, conformity in the place of conscience, or stagnation instead of growth. Trust instead in the transformative power of conflict, engaged with wisdom, courage, and compassion, for it is not in the absence of opposition, but in its purposeful embrace, that we find our fullest expression as human beings. This is not an easy path. It demands courage to face what we would rather avoid, wisdom to distinguish between destructive and constructive conflict, and compassion to remember our shared humanity, even in the midst of our deepest disagreements. But it offers something no false harmony could provide: the possibility of genuine connection, authentic growth, and a more just world forged in the creative tension between what is and what might be. The lake may seem peaceful, but it is in the river, ever changing, ever challenging, ever in conflict with itself and its surroundings, that we discover the true nature of life's journey. And it is only by entering the flow, not by standing safely on the shore, that we become participants in that magnificent, turbulent, transformative current that carries us all forward into new possibilities.